Hi, I'm Mitchell.
And I'm John.
And this is...
Board Game Battles.
Our debate this week is...
Best Aesthetic Game.
For my champion, I've chosen... The Island of El Dorado.
For my champion, I've chosen Photosynthesis.
Why does everybody always put their boxes in front of mine? Get this out of here. I'm going first. In the Island of El Dorado, players take on the guise of explorers traipsing around, well, the Island of El Dorado. They'll gather resources, build structures, and raise an army in hopes of discovering secret shrines. Offering tribute at each of these shrines is a requirement for victory, as is the discovery of another hidden artifact in the cave, which is a separate map that is underground. Obviously, that's how caves work. But of course, these shrines and these hidden artifacts will be protected by monsters and of course the other players. In my long list of pros, the first are the beautiful components. Now you'll see we've got a nice sleek box, and of course in a game that is vying for best aesthetic game, I've got to really go into detail on the components. My favorite part about this game is the fact that all artwork in it is from the 16th century, which is when the game takes place. I'm sure the manufacturer saved a pretty penny not having to pay a designer. We've got some very thick, heavy polyresin shrines that are basically the equivalent of a paperweight. We've got a nice magnetic lid on the box that snaps shut, a custom mini for each character, linen bags for each player, and there's a really nice organizer tray that requires no zipping. Any quips so far?
Not yet.
Not yet. Alright, the second thing I really like about this game is your control over randomness. So each turn you roll 2 dice. Then you choose one to determine how many resources you gain and one to represent the movement ability of your character. I really like when games have some randomness because it allows for exciting upsets, but too much can be frustrating. This game offsets the chaotic nature of randomness by allowing you to choose which die you use for your gather and which you use for your move. Sure, rolling snake eyes still won't feel great, but that's the nature of the beast.
Yes, and neither will your opponents rolling double sixes, or one of your opponents rolling one of the special numbers that triggers one of the other special character's abilities, which mess up your gameplay. But, not in Photosynthesis.
Okay, look, we're not to the asymmetry yet, but that is my next point. Asymmetry. So, as you move around the board, there are different structures or units you can build. I like that the base game actions are all the same because it makes the game easier to learn, but the characters are asymmetric, allowing for a lot of replayability. Just like the dice, though, randomness is counteracted through the provision of double-sided boards with differing powers on each side.
Yes, and some of those are wildly different. For instance, there's one that gives you a meeple that doesn't do anything, and another that steals all of your opponent's resources.
Now listen, I agree that it may not be 100% balanced, and some may need to be nerfed and others need to be buffed, but this meeple you're talking about, yes, it is just a farmer for producing in some instances, but in other times it's a soldier. That could be the difference between winning and losing a battle. So in my opinion, that's actually a really good benefit that I would go for if I got that card in certain situations. Moving on, and that's the impetus to explore. Anytime you step on an unexplored area, you simply flip a new tile and you hope to find a shrine. So this is encouraging you to explore and oftentimes create a map that makes it hard for your opponents to reach the spoils that you uncover. It creates interesting and different boards for each game, adding even more to the replayability.
You know, that impetus to explore can sometimes lead you to ruin. Like one time when I kept running into nothing but lakes and never being able to find that garden space. Sometimes it's more beneficial to just sit back and wait for your opponents to figure it out.
It leads to ruin, like the ruins that you're trying to find?
That's not even a joke.
Anyway, moving on to the fact that there are technically never-ending turns. Even when it's not your turn, you can interrupt another player's turn to attack them if they pass close enough to you. This keeps you on your toes to constantly be dialed into the game.
Never-ending turns, huh? Sometimes the game feels never-ending.
Yeah, maybe when you're playing because you suck and you can't get the victor conditions. Anyway, another thing I really like is the fact that you can essentially have mobile bases. So unlike other games like, say, Catan, where once you build something, it's pretty much there for eternity, you can go back on the space where you built something and unbuild it for an equal amount of resources. Essentially, you're getting a refund. A lot of people say that this game looks a bit like Catan, but it's very different, and that's just one aspect that makes it in a completely different ball field. So what I like to do is once I find a shrine or a cave entrance, I will essentially move a base that I set up elsewhere to defend that so that I can get those benefits, but my opponents cannot. So each of those bases that you present offerings to will let you roll another die in combat, so it's a really good thing to guard.
Yeah, sometimes you'll really need to make those mobile bases because, well, it'll just build up over time and come down to a showdown that is more or less a very random die roll.
I disagree completely. It all has to do with essentially the engine you've built, and that makes it all the more epic, which kind of brings me to my last point, unless you had something else to say on that topic.
No, not yet.
Not yet again. So my last and final pro is that in a few ways, it's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure game. Because you can go and try to find all those shrines to make offerings to get your character stronger, but at the same time, that means your opponents may be getting a lot of resources so that maybe they can build up their army or be ready to build a base as soon as you discover it. This means that the game will almost always end with an epic showdown.
Yeah, that showdown can be a little bit less epic because of the cup. Yeah, of course you're not really looking for El Dorado like you'd expect. You're already on that island, and you have this magical cup you find, and that can make that last showdown a little bit less epic because of the big bonus it gives.
He's referring to that artifact that I mentioned that's in the cave. And yes, it does give your character +2 power, which means he rolls 2 more dice in combat, whereas the other shrines only give 1. But it's a trade-off. You have to find the balance, that risk versus reward. So a couple things. In the cave, there are monsters that you have to fight to get to that. Also, there are no resources. There are no garden tiles, which are like wild resources. In fact, there are no tiles whatsoever other than just blank black tiles that won't give you anything. So while I'm getting this very powerful artifact, you guys and the other opponents are exploring the island, getting resources, building an army, building structures, and probably powering up from paying tribute to these different shrines. Look, I'm tired of you poo-pooing on one of my favorite games. Let's flip the lid and talk about your game, Photosynthesis, or what I like to call trees.
Photosynthesis is a beautiful game in which you're trying to build a forest of many different various breeds of trees, and you're trying to spread your trees farther and wider than your opponents. Now, once a tree grows to old age and dies, it gives you victory points based on the richness of the soil of where it was planted. Of course, there can only be one victor of the greatest family of trees, but at the end of the game, it's still filled with a beautiful menagerie of colors. There's also some pretty, I would say, even more unique components than the other game. There are these beautiful trees of different size and shape. They have a lot of variety with them.
Now, I must admit, these standees are very, very beautiful. However, they are made of cardboard, and in my copy of the game, they fairly quickly started getting bent and fraying a bit on the edges. Minor quip, but it could be a slightly higher quality. You may continue.
Yes, this game is very symmetrical compared to our opponent. The system has shared knowledge, and there's no imbalance in the mechanics. Everybody has the same start, 2 seeds, 4 small trees, and 1 medium tree, and they have equal access to the board and where they can place everything.
Here's the thing. With a symmetric game, it can start to feel the same every time. You basically have nothing to point you in a certain direction, no secret objective, no extra perk that you get because of a character or a house that you have, and so it just makes it a little stale and less replayable, in my opinion.
Funny, I'm going to talk a little bit about replayability later, but for now, I'm going to talk about how intuitive the design makes the mechanics. Whenever the sun piece changes direction, which is a really large, beautiful component, it also affects all of the mechanics of the game. You're now looking at trees, which now block other trees from the specific angle, and only because they're a specific size, smaller or larger than their opponent.
Okay, so you say it's intuitive, and a lot of it is, but there are a couple things that I have beef with. So first of all, before you can play any tree other than your starting trees or seeds, you have to first purchase them with light points. There's no place on your board for purchased trees, so you just have to take them off your board. So I've made the mistake, I've seen other players make the mistake of trying to plant a tree straight from your board, and it does cause some problems. Secondly, you had something to say about that?
No, but
Okay.
I'll get to it in a bit.
Okay, secondly, in terms of intuition, okay, it makes sense that the taller a tree is, the more that it's going to block. The larger tree is going to block the middle tree. But also, that's how far it casts its shadow. So a larger tree will cast its shadow 3 spaces. If we're talking intuition, you would think it would kind of be descending, right? But it blocks everything equal to or smaller than it for 3 spaces, and then just goes straight down. So this tree isn't blocked at all, but this one is completely blocked, and it kind of doesn't make much sense. But maybe I'm being too nitpicky and sciencey, whatever. Move on. What's your next point?
I love how this game has no randomness. Every turn, each player gains light points based on where their trees are located and the sun is facing. And the sun moves in a preset path along the board that everybody knows about. That means that the only thing affecting the game is you and the other player's choices.
So here's my problem with the fact that there's no randomness. You know exactly when the game is going to end because the sun makes 3 rotations and there are 6 stops on each rotation, so a total of 18 turns. The problem is it takes you 5 turns to go from empty ground to chopping down a tree to get points. So you can plant a seed, then the next turn, grow it to a small tree, then a medium, then a big, and then chop it down, which for whatever reason we have started calling popping a big boy. So it takes you 5 turns to do that. That's almost an entire rotation of the sun. So with you knowing the sun is about to finish its 3rd rotation, if you don't already have a seed down, there's no point in you putting any more down other than getting light points. Which helps to an extent. That's one of the other ways to get victory points by hoarding up that light for the end of the game, but it's only 1 point for every 3, so it makes the end game a little anticlimactic for me.
Well, this game does have a variety of strategy. With no random mechanics and no dice rolls, you might expect a game to be overly simplistic, a winning strategy, as Mitchell said, to be kind of inevitable and obvious. But, like in chess, the options are varied enough and there are enough winning strategies that it can still be very exciting. You can just try to move towards the center of the board and plant on the most fertile soil and then try to pop your big boys as soon as possible, but you could also do excellent counterplay and just put seeds in spots where your opponents would be growing entire big trees and never growing them because you're growing somewhere else. And I really believe that even with a simplicity in a certain sense, that it really offers a greater variety than even the Island or the Cup of El Dorado might offer.
Look, here's the problem with this variety of strategy. It's an engine builder that requires you to destroy your own engine. Those big boys are the things that give you 3 light points each, but they're also the only way you get points, and you have to chop them down. But in the process, you're losing your ability to get the points to build more, and you can only have 2 at a time. So I know that there has to be some risk reward and some balancing in games, but in my opinion, this one's just a little bit too much. But look, enough negativity. It's time for you to tell me at least one thing you like about the Island of El Dorado. I'll put mine in front this time, as you noticed, so hit me with it.
Well, I do have to say that photosynthesis, although having beautiful components, they are lightweight and a bit easy to nick, like you said. So I do want to say that the Island of El Dorado has very heavy and durable components that will probably outlast it if you have any kids.
Thank you for not talking about the Cup of El Dorado and also appealing to my dad's side because I do have those kids. So let me switch these. I'll be respectful. Photosynthesis, like he said, complete lack of randomness. I do like that. That's rare to find in a game. But ultimately, these components are very, very beautiful. It makes a great tableau at the end of the game. And for a best aesthetic game category, I think it's a great contender. And now our conversation is done. Nope, mine goes on this side. Now it's in your hands, all right? There's going to be a ballot. We need you guys to pick which one is better. The Island of El Dorado, Photosynthesis. Not that the other one necessarily is bad, but which do you like better? Maybe specifically in the genre, or as a game, maybe based on our debate, maybe based on your plays of the game. I want you guys to have some comments and have a discussion. In a week, John will be back. We'll read those comments and announce the winner. With that, I'll go ahead and say I'm Mitchell.
I'm John.
And this is
Board Game Battles.